This is Ma Shelley, author of Better Dead Than Never. We'll be starting today from a little town called Boogaloo Bay, deep in the Louisiana South. Better Dead Than Never, Chapter 1. Run for Your Life. It was the beginning of the end. The winds came barreling in like a mad bull in the dark. Day transformed into night as the monster of the Gulf approached. The hurricane was predicted to hit further east and far from Louisiana. Johnny Ray hated the storms as much as he hated living alone, but the solitary life was safe. He looked out his window, observing the tiny town of Boogaloo Bay. His trailer was small and dank, but just comfortable enough for a heavy-set man like Johnny Ray to crash for the night and eat a regular diet of fast food, such as hamburgers and French fries. He fidgeted with a pack of cheap cigarettes and attempted to light up. 1 strike, 2. Each time the wooden matchstick would break in half. Johnny Ray could have stayed safe and sound back at the plantation, but the house was not big enough for him and that wicked woman, Betty. Although she did not live there, she never seemed to leave. The thought did cross Johnny's mind about choking the life out of her. A hurricane was the perfect opportunity to knock off the enemy. He could see it in his head, her body twisting and turning, kicking and squirming as he shoved her face down in the flood water. No one would suspect a thing. Johnny quickly shook off the notion. He had too much on his mind after the disappearance of his parents and burying his faithful dog Pepper out in the yard. Betty could wait for another day. The rain pattered on the roof like a tin can. The sound was offbeat and irritating, more annoying than when the crows dropped pecans and had a bowling match above his head. As the storm began to swell, branches ripped from the treetops and struck the trailer like a police officer banging at the door. At first, Johnny didn't think anything of it. Weather like this often happens in the South. At one moment it would be storming, and the next it would be a bright sunny day. This time the drumming rain was persistent and nerve-wracking, and Johnny could feel that dreaded twitch coming to life in his left eye. Under the trailer there was a black feral cat, crying in terrific fear. Its yowling was driving Johnny insane. He hated that cat, but never had the courage to shoot it in the head. He tried poisoning it many times, but the damn thing kept coming back to life. Between the screaming feline and the thunderous storm, he couldn't take it any longer. The stupid thing was driving him out of his own home and out of his mind. Johnny had to find someplace else to go. The trailer began rocking in the howling gale-force winds. "I have to get out of here," Johnny shouted. In a panic, Johnny raced about the trailer, trying to grab his most prized possessions. He saw nothing, except for his old dingy brown jacket on the sofa bed. It was the same one he had always worn for the past 20 years. He grabbed a large wad of cash and shoved it into his large coat pocket. As he attempted to go outside, the wind grabbed the thin metal door like a hungry bear. It ripped the door off its hinges. It flung up into the air, nearly pulling Johnny's arm out of its socket. He wobbled and lost his balance. He screamed like a little girl. Then Johnny went tumbling down the steps, landing face first in the mud. With a discouraging moan, he painfully rolled over. He spat out gobs of mud and slush and simply sat there in the rain. Suddenly, the evil black cat darted out in front of Johnny. It fiercely hissed at him, face to face. "Yow!" Johnny reached out to choke it to death,
but the creature rushed past and entered the trailer for safety. Wiping the mud from his eyes, Johnny Ray looked up to see his world completely altered. He couldn't believe the sight. Once a beautiful land full of green trees and yellow flowers had become a bleak, black and gray scene from an old horror flick. Except this was real, and he was the star. "This isn't real! This isn't real!" Johnny told himself, hoping to wake up from the nightmare. As he sat in the wet, sticky mud, another gust of wind exploded. Lightning crackled across the sky. The thunder alone was punishing. It was as if he was watching someone else's story, when before his eyes he saw the devil lift his little trailer and toss it aside like a toy truck. Glass shattered in all directions. The paper-thin roof crushed in like a beer can. Helplessly frozen in fear, Johnny watched his home tumble down the road, with the cat still inside screaming for its life. The trees above were whipping about and bending wildly, moaning like 1,000 suffering ghosts. Johnny had to make it to his truck to escape. He stumbled to his feet, only to be knocked down once again. His chest was pounding like a heart attack. Oftentimes before, he wished he could die, but not this way. Hope then appeared in the form of an old white Ford 1,000,000 miles away. Crawling on his hands and knees, Johnny fumbled through the darkness in search of salvation. The rain poured down like giant waves on the sea. It was now or never, and Johnny Ray was not ready to be a dead man, at least not yet. He painfully made his way through the slushy, wet ground, still choking on sticky blobs of mud. Then he touched something. It was soft, wet, and squishy.
Johnny looked down and began to gag. There, in the floodwater, was his small, black, dead dog, Pepper. He had washed away from his grave. The dog's eyes had fallen out of its head and were hanging over his nose. The smell of rotten feces filled Johnny's mouth. Stale beer and chewed-up nuts then rose from Johnny's stomach. "Oh, God! Oh, God!" Johnny Ray hollered while vomiting over the decaying dog. Johnny stumbled to his feet, still heaving from the sight of his beloved, grotesque pet. The stench would linger in his mouth for hours. Shaking off his emotions, he used all of his strength to battle the raging wind. He staggered toward the truck, with sheets of stinging rain still beating against his face. He grabbed the door handle and quickly climbed up inside the cab. "Finally, I'm safe," he shouted. A moment of rest was all he would need before Johnny could leave. Digging into his jeans pocket, he pulled out an inhaler. Once Johnny caught his breath, he fumbled in his pocket again, searching for the keys. He made a heavy sigh, relieved he didn't leave them inside the trailer. Just when he was about to start the ignition, lightning came crashing down. The whites of Johnny's eyes bulged as he watched the lightning strike an old oak tree directly in front of him. The tree burst into flames, like a towering inferno. Within seconds it began to make its eternal descent, toppling toward the truck. "Holy shit!" Johnny cried. His hands trembled as he struggled to get the truck to start. Click, click, chugga, chugga. "Come on, start, goddammit!" Then from out of the blue, Johnny could hear the memory of Betty belittling him like she always had done. "Why does everything always happen to you?" she screamed. "No, no, no, no! Get out of my head!" he shouted, not certain if he was hollering at her or the blazing disaster coming his way. "This isn't happening to me!" Johnny yelled as he kept turning the key and pumping the gas pedal, watching the giant torch fall in his direction. "That's it. I'm a dead man." The truck kicked on, puffing out a cloud of black smoke. Johnny then thrust the vehicle into reverse as the huge burning tree toppled down past the truck window. He sat with his mouth slung open in shock, grabbed his inhaler, and took another puff. Although it all seemed to happen in slow motion, he did not even have time for his life to flash before his eyes. The glowing fire flickered in his black rim glasses. He wasn't sure, but he thought he may have pissed in his pants. It was hard to tell because he was rain-soaked from head to toe. With trembling hands, he reached for a pack of cigarettes from under the seat. Pulling out the precious tobacco for a drag of relief, Johnny realized he didn't have a lighter or any matches. The storm continued to rage, flooding the streets and turning them into newly formed rivers. Johnny could have sought shelter from the storm at the family home, but there was no way he would ever return to that hellhole where his nightmare began. He had all the money in the world to go wherever he wanted. After his parents sold their shrimping vessels, they took off to navigate the world on their 60-foot yacht. However, they never made it to port on their first stop. Two elderly folk, like Johnny's parents, were ripe for the picking. It was assumed they were robbed and killed by pirates. After they were officially recognized as deceased instead of missing, Johnny Ray inherited his parents' entire fortune. The only safe place Johnny knew was the Bayou Bar and Grill. Locals called it the barn because it was once an old outbuilding for farm animals. Attempting to navigate, he could barely see 12 inches ahead. He squinted his eyes, fixated on the road. The windshield wipers wagged wildly like an excited dog. The rushing water began to quickly rise. Johnny's bald tires could barely grip the road. The torrent then lifted his truck, and it began to hydroplane downstream. "Oh, hell no!" Johnny shouted. "Not again!" Then, in a stroke of luck, his tires took hold of the ground. He made a beeline for his home away from home, the barn. It was the longest 5-minute drive of his life. Trash cans and patio furniture tumbled and flew across the road. The truck headlights were a flickering candle, and Johnny was blinded by the darkness. The power lines above popped and exploded like a desert war zone. Flashes of endless lightning were the only salvation to guide the path. Johnny had pulled into the lake which had formed in front of the barn. There in the darkness was his refuge, and a beer. Like shards of glass, the wind and rain continued to batter everything in its path. Johnny shoved the gears into park and awkwardly raced for the door. This time, trying not to slip and fall, wildly banging back and forth, he struggled to pull the door closed, and then looked about the dark room. Once a bustling place of entertainment, full of music and laughter, the barn was now a ghost town from an old Western movie. Johnny finally felt safe. No one was there, and he could do anything he wanted. It was every beer lover's dream. Step by step, he slowly made his way through the darkness. He could faintly see the image of a pool table. Like a wallflower, he often watched others play as if he was an outcast from behind a window. He never did have the courage to join in, for fear of ripping the velvet table with a pool stick. Suddenly he saw something wonderful, like a shining beacon. It was the Holy Grail, a wall full of every type of beer, dark and light. Johnny laughed and approached his bounty like a zombie. "Ah, you're mine, all mine," he shouted. Crazed by his addiction, Johnny Ray was on a new mission. He was a hungry bear in springtime, and he would consume all the beer to his heart's delight. At that moment, the memory of his home tumbling down the road and the ever-growing storm of the century vanished from his mind. He felt as if he was the luckiest man in the world. Just as he was about to reach his alcoholic prize, Johnny rammed his knee into the table hidden in the dark. He crashed down like a boulder. The table broke into pieces under his enormous weight. He hit the hardwood floor with a bang. Pain struck his knee bone like a knife. Johnny's glasses flew off his face and across the room. He laid in agony, knowing he had to be black and blue. "Mother!" he cursed. "Everything does happen to me. Why can't you be more like your younger brother?" he heard the voice. Shut up, bitch!" Johnny cursed. "You're not my mother." Now, more blind than ever, Johnny was determined to have that drink. Who would know? What's the harm? Why should I care? He argued with himself. He then had two important decisions to make. Should I find my glasses, or should I get the beer first? He pondered. It was an easy and quite obvious decision to make. He would go for the beer, but not the cheap kind he always bought for $1 during happy hour. The expensive beer brewed for a king. Crossing the room with baby steps, he carefully touched obstacles which stood before him. There was no way he was about to fall over another table again. Then he bumped into the bar, still completely unaware of the ever-growing storm stirring above his head. "Now, just a little further, and you will be mine," Johnny shouted to no one. His mouth was watering like Pavlov's dog, and his eyes grew wide with excitement. He reached for the beer, a dark one, he decided. After all, dark beer was for the rich and powerful. It was finally time to celebrate. Tonight, he would be the triumphant man everyone adored, and not the loser. In his mind, he could see them all, the entire town, honoring him for being their hero. "Johnny! Johnny!" they cheered as they lifted him up on their shoulders. I do feel like a wealthy man, and smart, too. A lone man in a bar full of free alcohol. If only they could see me now. Oh, life couldn't be better. Johnny cracked open the bottle, which made a satisfying hissing sound as the carbonation was released. He carefully placed the bottle cap in his pocket as a souvenir and prepared himself for the luscious drink. It was warm due to the power outage, but he didn't care. This was finally his night, and Johnny felt on top of the world. The only thing he needed was a good smoke, and not the cheap ones he kept in his shirt pocket. "You're stealing! Shame on you, J.R.!" Johnny despised the sound of Betty's voice, especially when she called him J.R. "You only call me that 'Cause you can't remember my name," Johnny cried, trying not to sound like a big baby. He quickly took a long, savoring swig of the life-saving elixir and set the bottle down on the bar top with a delicious moan. Then Johnny fumbled below the countertop. There it was. Although it was too dark to see, he could feel it. It was a premium red peck, and there next to it was a lighter, which actually worked. He tapped a cigarette out of the box and flicked the lighter. He didn't know what he loved more, the smell of fresh tobacco or the smell of lighter fluid. Proud of himself, he slid the lighter and pack of cigarettes into his coat pocket. Then he lifted the brown beer bottle to his mouth again. With a pleasing sigh, Johnny was in heaven. That was pages 1 through 8 of Better Dead Than Never by me, Ma Shelley. I am broadcasting the entire book for your listening pleasure. If you're interested in a hardback copy or in a Kindle, you may visit MaShelleybooks.com and also Amazon.